Senator Scott.
Senator Mullin, congratulations on your nomination. This is a great honor that you have, and you have a great background. So I know you'll work your butt off in the job like you do everything else. President Trump was elected to secure our border, crack down on sanctuary cities, and keep our country safe. I want to thank the President for his leadership and Secretary Noem's help. Incredible progress has been made. Our streets are safer, our borders respected, and the jobs we've created are going to people in this country legally. Now, as a result of the Democrats' partial shutdown, in the fourth week, TSA agents are not getting paid. Everybody in the Senate's getting paid. I've had a bill since I got up here. If we don't pass budgets, we shouldn't get paid. I've had one of my Democrat colleagues say, I've got a mortgage. I have to get paid. Well, think about all these people. TSA agents are not getting paid. Airport lines are in gridlock. We got FEMA grants stalling. Coast Guard counterterrorism operations are shrinking amid rising Iranian threats to our homeland. My understanding is ICE agents are getting paid, but not ICE leadership is necessarily getting paid. Last week, 2 terrorists boldly and hatefully attacked our citizens right here on our home soil, killing at least one person. The president's decision to stop the nuclear weapons and the ballistic missiles was a reason. What he's doing is making sure we don't get these attacks on our soil. It was only as a result of brave actions of a class of future military officers, citizens, and law enforcement that stopped these tragedies. They could have been massacres. Still, even as Americans are losing their lives, my Democrat colleagues are refusing to fund DHS and give them what they need to uncover and stop plots like these and protect the lives of our families and neighbors. It seems like that's our job up here. So, Senator Mullin, how do you view Senate Democrats recklessly holding DHS funds hostage at the expense of our national security interests amid threats from Iran and its proxies?
Senator, it's unconscionable. How can you sit there with a straight face and say that we're trying to take care of the American worker when you're choosing to not pay 260,000 people and you're affecting their families? We've heard the stories of families having to stand in charitable lines for basic needs or getting a loan. And like I said, this isn't the first time. We're a month into this. They just came out of a 43-day shutdown that they were probably just recovering from. And yet we're still going to sit there with a straight face and say it's not about politics?
So in sanctuary cities, local authorities can decline ICE detainers, which means that criminals are released back into the community rather than transferred safely into ICE custody. First off, I can't imagine anybody elected that wants criminals back in their community, but that's happening. This creates opportunities for illegal fugitives to relocate or reoffend, like in the tragic murder of Kate Stanley. It also forces DHS officers to go into neighborhoods to root out violent criminals, which is way more dangerous for everybody. Not only does this cost the taxpayer more, but also increases the risk for everybody involved, including bystanders, DHS officers, and potential future victims. We're seeing this play out right now just a few miles away, where local officials in Fairfax, Virginia are refusing to turn over an illegal immigrant who was arrested for groping 12 underage students. And the local elected want to put that person back out in the community. That's not even here legally. Instead of turning him over to ICE, Fairfax County prosecutors are trying to get him released. This is just one example of how sanctuary city policies choose to put illegal aliens over American citizens. How do you plan to deal with sanctuary cities like Los Angeles and Chicago to remove criminal illegal aliens?
Sir, it's been a difficult conversation that's been had with these sanctuary cities. As I said, going on, we don't get to choose which laws we enforce. As elected officials, you shouldn't choose which laws you enforce. We're not asking them to go out there and enforce immigration. We're just saying, be good partners with us. If we've got to serve judicial warrants, let us go serve the judicial warrants. If you pull over somebody that's wanted, that's in the country illegally, and it's a municipality, we're saying just hold them. At least let us do a background check on them and see who they are. And working with the municipalities are going to be vitally important, but also you've got to take a look at if they're not willing to enforce federal law and work with us, then where's the taxpayer dollars going to? And ideally, I would like to go in there and talk to the mayors. I'd like to go in there and talk to the sheriffs, talk to the police chiefs. Say, what is your concerns? How can we get past this? Because the president has made it very clear he wants to protect the streets for every American. He wants to restore law and order to every city. I don't think that should be controversial. But some people have for political purposes, or maybe they didn't like the tactics. Either way, I find it really hard to believe that law enforcement in those communities don't want to do their job. So maybe we sit down and we just work it out. It's like I tell my wife all the time. Sometimes when she gets mad at me, and I'm right, she's wrong, by the way, but sometimes when she gets mad at me, I have to apologize because I simply say, that was a joke, by the way, for everybody that's married. But I have to apologize, and sometimes I tell her, I said, honey, it's a misunderstanding. We still love each other. We still want the best for our family. And these law enforcement, and I would even say these mayors, they still love their community. They still love their cities. They still love this country. So maybe it's a misunderstanding we can work by. And I'm going to start with that. That's what I'm going to start with. If we have to do something different, then we will, but that's where I'm going to start at. It's a misunderstanding, but we're going to force the nation laws and make sure we protect everybody in their city and hopefully work with them and never work against them.
Senator Mullin, as Secretary of Homeland Security, do you have any ability to ban funding to sanctuary cities that ignore the federal laws meant to make citizens' lives safer, but then turn around and ask for federal money for added protection?
Sir, that would be a last option, but at the end of the day, taxpayer dollars have to be used for the right purposes. And if people are refusing to enforce the nation's laws, then I think it's really hard to justify why we're sending them taxpayer dollars that are coming out of Oklahoma or coming out of Florida or coming out of Kansas or Arkansas when they're making that decision. But I will say that is not going to be my first or second or even third approach, but that would be my last resort.
All right. Congratulations on your nomination. Good luck.
Thank you.
Senator Fetterman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, hello, Senator Mullin. Thank you for coming in today. So, Americans don't like chaos. You know, America definitely didn't like the kinds of chaos during the Biden administration at the border. You know, as a Democrat, I was alarmed that there were up to 300,000 encounters at our border once a month. And that puts that in perspective. That's the size of Pittsburgh showing up at our border. And that's not sustainable, and that's not manageable, and it's making it possible for us to assimilate. And now if you care about immigration, as I deeply do, you can't possibly provide the American dream for people when the size of Pittsburgh showing up at our border once a month. That need to be brought under control. And that happened. I signed up that as a Democrat. The second part is rounding up all of the criminals and deport them. You know, I can't imagine why we can't agree with that as well, too. That's another thing that I signed up. One name that often doesn't come from my side is Laken Riley. I agree for Renee Good, and I agree for Alex Petty, but I also deeply, deeply agree for Laken Riley and their family. And now all three were failures of our government there in that circumstances. And as I was proud to be the co-sponsor of the Laken Riley bill, because we have to address that. Two things must be true here. We need to have a secure border, and we have to round up and deport every single criminal in our nation. I can't imagine why that's critical or controversial for anybody, you know. So I'm trying to find a way forward. And now you and I have had conversations on this, and that's your commitment to focus on those things. I believe that's effective, accurate, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And now another thing. I know there's a lot of hard personal feelings here, and absolutely, it's terrible what's happened, and political violence. I mean, it's rampant. So now, but also, President O'Brien's here not for round two. He's here because he fully supports your correct. Yeah, round three. Okay. Yeah. So it's about letting it go and moving on. And I've done that too. when I was in the hospital and things were touch and go. You know, I know there were unkind things said about me, but I can just say that it's better to just let it all go and to find a way forward. That's the time that we're in right now in our country on that. Now, people might describe you in those kinds of moments, but I'm going to describe you. We got a chance to get to know better when we joined a Codel to Turks and Caicos, correct?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and we did that. We did that because Americans were looking at over a decade in prison because they had a couple random bullets in their luggage. And those Americans ran the gamut of a black grandmother from Florida, I believe, Florida, and Pennsylvania, that live in Western Pennsylvania, that I did, and I was able to welcome him at the airport when he returned there. So that was about a commitment to working together. Imagine, just because a couple random bullets accidentally, they were looking at over a decade in prison. Now, we worked together, and now not one single American really faced that kinds of thing. So that's about committed to working together. So now, and also as a Democrat, you know, that I made me the only Democrat that refused to shutting our DHS down. You know, some people might say that that doesn't mean I have any less commitment to reform ICE. That's just categorically not true. But it's a strange devotion. I don't understand why you would shut the entire agency down just because you want those kind of reforms on ICE that has absolutely no impact on ICE and doesn't force any of those things. I refuse to do that, and I refuse to punish those union members that are working. And now especially parts of that, it's true. It's like the cybersecurity agency is part of DHS.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and that's currently on the shutdown. And now two of the top agents of cyber attacks come from Iran and China. They must be elated to know that that part is all shut down, because that's part of this shutdown that does not bring any reform to ICE. You know, that I want any less than other Democrats, you know, here. The difference is I refuse to punish and make our nation less secure part of that. So for me, I came here and I committed to come here with an open mind, and I'm going to continue to do that. And it's not going to be about gotcha moments. For me, it's about just saying my experience with you has been consistent kindness and professionalism. You know, the first time I met, it was you and your wife behind you when I was here at the orientation here in the Senate. And even before you got the call for the big job, you know, we were even discussing about getting together and having dinner as family. So that's an ongoing relationship, because that's also part of the fact here in this town. You got to get along and find a way to work together. And now we have to come at it and just let things go in the past for that. Finding a way forward, that's my responsibility to represent Pennsylvania. And for you, I just want to thank you for showing up. And now I'm going to engage, and I'm going to remain with an open mind throughout all this, as I made to my friend here. And I'm going to do that. So thank you for bringing your family here, too. And I look forward to hearing for the rest of my colleagues' views on you. Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Christy, for being here as well. Senator Mullin, I have to say, I'm just going to be blunt, very honest with you. I hope that the president is watching. I am going to say to the president, I am really upset that he has made your nomination. Why? Because I will be losing from the Senate one of the best friends that I have here, truly. But in that same accord, I am so grateful to the president for making your nomination to Department of Homeland Security. So we've had a lot of discussion here. I know, just as Senator Fetterman said, there are a lot of differences and opinions on the politics surrounding DHS. And Senator Fetterman mentioned that he grieves for all of those that we have lost. Those protesters, we grieve the loss of young women, young men that we have seen at the hands of those that have migrated illegally into the United States of America. We grieve them all. And I think we can acknowledge that. And it's important that we do that. We're in really trying times right now. And one of the things that I want to focus on right now is the bipartisanship that you have had with so many members in the House, in the Senate, the relationships that you have outside of this body, because I think it's really important, because we get in the political fights all the time, and we're all trying to score points back and forth. Bipartisanship is not very sexy, but I think we need a lot more of it. So Josh Gottheimer was here today. I respect him so much. And the fact that you remain friends today is incredibly important. I noticed you also gave Joe Kennedy a shout out. So I sent him a picture I took of you from the dais because I know Joe really well as well. There are so many relationships that we have in this body, and I wish more people would see that we have those relationships. We carry them in our hearts. It means we are better people because we open our minds to listen. And to that point, I want to thank you, Mr. O'Brien, for being here as well. Because what started out as a very big difference between you and Mr. O'Brien, you found a way to both of you come together to share thoughts and ideas and turn something really good out of that discourse. And I think more people need to learn how to do that. And so to all my friends sitting here in the dais and those that are watching, is that this is how America works, where we're able to take differences and come together and not just shout at one another, but come together and figure out a way forward. That's what makes this country such an incredibly brilliant country, is that we can recognize those differences. So I want to talk a little bit about a trip that we took last year. So many folks know that you serve on armed services. I serve on armed services. We do congressional delegation visits. And a little over a year ago, or about a year ago, Senator Mullin led a congressional delegation visit into a country that had not been visited by an official delegation trip in 15 years. Along on that trip, I was also there. Chairman Smith was on this trip as well as Democrat Jimmy Panetta of California. We went to Syria. We sat down with the president there, al-Shara, for his first official visit from the United States of America. Now, a lot of people will say, he was a member of al-Qaeda. What are you doing sitting down with somebody that was a member of al-Qaeda? It's the same reason we sit down with people that we have differences with, is to find a way forward. So, Senator Mullin, I would like you to talk a little bit about that trip and why you believed it was important that we do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. You're right. The president of Syria wasn't really somebody we should have a lot of common ground with. And we actually talked about that. Him and I talked about that. Had a very blunt relationship about it. But the fact is, our world is different. And there's different leaders for different countries and different places. And you have to understand the region and the area they're in. We're not in the business of necessarily picking the leaders, but when we do, hopefully there's a way that we can work it out. And if you remember the president at the time, he said, when I was younger, I was fed a lot of propaganda. And I'm paraphrasing this. He says, but when I was in American prison in Iraq, he started looking at things different. And then he also went on to say, yes, I was affiliated with al-Qaeda, but it's much like you guys being affiliated with Russia. It was interesting to me knowing how you went through the history. He said, it's much like you guys being affiliated with Russia and China in World War II, and look where you're at today. Sometimes in war, when we're fighting for our country, I left Iraq and came back and fought for Syria because that's my home. We have the most diverse population in the history of the world in Damascus. And I don't want the foreign influence. And after I got out, I realized my fight is for my country, not for this necessarily organization, but for me to get resources, for me to get fighters, for me to be able to fight for my country. And hopefully, even though he said I never planned on being president of the country. I was just wanting to get my home back. I find myself here. And he was very open. He says, I have made mistakes. And I said, I've made mistakes too. And I said, we're not perfect, but if we can work together to be a trust but verified, he says, I want a relationship with the United States. Mm-hmm. I want to have that relationship. That's not common for somebody with al-Qaeda ties. That's somebody that says, yes, my past is my past, but I'm looking to the future. And I think we all have past. In past, we can learn from. We learn from successes and failures in our past. But if we can grab the past that we made a mistake on and say, yeah, that's a mistake, I'm not going to make it again, that's a lesson. That's where wisdom comes from. If you can also learn from your successes, then that's also where wisdom comes from, and that's considered someone that has the potential to be a leader. And I would rather work with those leaders like that than to continue to see the civil war that was going on, and in some cases still going on in Syria.
Yes, and thank you. And I just use this because my time has expired, just to demonstrate how we all have such significant differences. We can come from different backgrounds, but I've been on a lot of congressional delegation visits, folks, a lot in the 12 years that I've been here. But to watch Senator Mullin lead this delegation and to be able to speak to someone that is far different than we are and bring our countries that closer together, I know that he will do that with every one of us serving in Congress. I know you will represent us very well. You will represent the administration very well. You will make our country safer. So thank you, Senator Mullin. Thank you, Christy, very much for your friendship as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Slotkin.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for our conversation yesterday. I want to just actually add on to what Senator Langford was saying and just focus on the attack we had at a temple that's very close to my heart in Michigan, place I know well. Last week, we had an anti-Semitic attack meant to terrorize not just that synagogue, but the entire Jewish community. And I think the light is really blinking red. And that is the feeling for the Jewish community. And just as an objective statement, the Jewish community is 10 times more likely to be the victim of a hate crime than all other religious groups combined. That's not a political statement. That's a factual statement from FBI data. We talked about the need to work together. The Jewish community is spending about $1 billion a year privately securing their own institutions. No religious group should have to spend that amount of money that could be going to lots of other things on their own security in the United States of America. So I would just ask your help in reforming the nonprofit security grant program so it's agile, so you don't have to win the grant and then still do 100 pieces of paper. Maybe even looking at a rapid reaction fund, but certainly asking for some sort of task force. You know, I'm thinking about the community in Australia that went to the Australian government, the Jewish community, and said, we're seeing just a real uptick in threats. We're terrified. And then we have Bondi Beach and a very horrible thing. So can we just agree in public, again, on a bipartisan basis, to sit together to reform this program and figure out how we manage to the threat? Because we're not hitting it right now.
Senator, you have a wealth of knowledge from your service in the intel community, and you will know this issue probably better than me. And so I would welcome the opportunity to sit down and talk to you, figure out what we need to do. I know this is very personal to you, and that's great. We may have some differences on some political views, but this isn't one. You and I will be, laser focused and get this resolved if it's possible. But yes, I would absolutely welcome an opportunity to work with you on this.
Great, I appreciate that. I think, in general, your position or your future position as Secretary of Homeland Security sits at the fulcrum of these big issues we're having as a country. Just big cultural issues. The use of law enforcement in our streets and where our rights begin and end, and then our elections, our democracy. And given the importance of that, I think it's important that we state really clearly where you are on those two issues. I think first and foremost on the use of ICE. My state voted for Donald Trump in 2024. A lot of people supported the president's immigration agenda, but then they watched with their own eyes, not filtered through a news source. They watched with their own eyes American citizens killed in their streets for protesting. They saw children caught in the crossfire and being tear gassed. They saw people randomly being pulled out of their cars and walking down the streets because they happened to look like they could be an immigrant and checked for their papers, which for many of us has a real history. They have seen law enforcement go into people's homes without a judicial warrant for a country that was invented because we were being oppressed by a foreign force that demanded entry into our homes. So you say you don't want ICE in the news. You say you want to rebuild trust. Your predecessor was fired because she couldn't manage that, and people had to go in and bring the temperature down. Can you, without other words, just state clearly what you'd be willing to do to fundamentally reform ICE and put into law to do so, since that trust is gone?
Ma'am, as you know, I can't make the law. You guys make that for me.
But you're going to be the secretary.
Yes, I agree, but I can't make the law. I can work within the parameters.
But tell us what you'd be willing to put into law.
So right now, the law that I work into is your guys' decision. We'll work through that. But I do believe there is a better approach. And I think working with municipalities, I would love to see ICE become a transport more than the front line. If we can get back into just simply working with law enforcement, we're going to them and we're picking up these criminals from their jail. One, we're going to reimburse them for having the person there. And have partnership is vitally important. I don't think there needs to be a law to change that. I think I can work within what is there. But there's an approach that can happen, but we got to have partners.
Yeah, I understand. But we're not going to agree to this here, but I would just say the ability, the trust is gone, and not just with Democrats. That's why we're here. That's why your predecessor was fired. And there needs to be fundamental reform of this law enforcement agency. And I think that the public writ large is crying out for that. Let me turn to elections.
Senator,
let me turn to elections. The Department of Homeland Security has the mandate since the Obama era for securing our election infrastructure. That's an important job, and you'll be secretary. The president has continued to say that he won the 2020 election, even though there's been 60 court cases saying the opposite. He has said he wants to federalize the elections. He has said name-check cities, including Detroit. He has said voting machines are inaccurate. He has said in the State of the Union, I was on the Senate floor, paraphrase, that if his side doesn't win in November, then the elections were rigged, which is exactly what he said 8 months before the 2020 election. You have your own history. You did not certify the 2020 election. There are people at the Department of Homeland Security, 3 people specifically, who are well-known election deniers now running election security functions. Who won the 2020 election?
Ma'am, we know that President Joe Biden was sworn into office. He was the president for the last 4 years.
But I do believe won the election?
My job as Department of Homeland Security Secretary will be to make sure that we assure that the elections are fair and people can trust them.
Does the federal government run the elections process, or do states?
It's very clear in the Constitution that the states control state elections, and then there is some federal oversight that's on it, but the federal government can set some standards. So if you're talking about the Save American Act, requiring you, which is within the Constitution, by the way, requiring individuals to be citizens of the United States, I don't think it's too much to ask somebody to prove they're a citizen of the United States.
That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about administering the elections. If you are Secretary of Homeland Security, do you feel you have the authority to put uniformed officers at polling locations in 2026?
Ma'am, we said this in your office. The only reason why my officers would be there if there was a specific threat for them to be there, not for intimidation. And
so even though we didn't need it during World War II, we didn't need it during Vietnam or the War on Terror, we never had to put uniformed military there. Now you feel that there's going to be a reason that there's going to be an armed threat to the United States that you
No,
need
ma'am.
to potentially
I said
be there?
I can't sit there and guarantee hypothetically of what threat would be and not. I'm not putting military. That's not within my privy.
Uniformed
Yes,
officers.
but if there is a threat, a specific threat, say it's in a Jewish community, and there is a threat that's specific to that polling area, then we will work with local law enforcement. There'll be a reason for us to be there, and it'll be known why we're there.
I think the reason you're here and not Kristi Noem is because Americans trust their local law enforcement now way more than they trust ICE. So I would just say if we ever get to the point where you are being asked to put armed ICE officers at polling locations, we have lost the plot as a country. We have fundamentally lost it. And until I hear someone tell me that this man, President Trump, will actually allow us to have a free and fair election, there is zero trust here, and I cannot trust that he won't try and steal it again. I yield back.